we have talked about the people who are supposed to know. We've talked about the ones who looked away. And tonight, we're going to talk about something bigger than individual people. We're going to talk about the system. The schools, the churches, the organizations that were specifically designed to protect people with policies, with authority, and with the power to intervene, and failed anyway. This one is going to be direct because institutional failure is not an accident, it's a choice. And the people who were failed by those institutions deserve to be named and have that named plainly. This is Coffee Talk with Paul. And this is part 3, the final part of our series on the people who didn't protect you. And this is the one that makes institutions uncomfortable. Good. Schools, churches, youth organizations, sports programs, these institutions exist in part to create safe environments for the people in their care. Most of them have policies in place. They have protocols. They have mandated reporting requirements, rules that are specifically designed to catch abuse and stop it. And yet, the number of survivors who were failed by institutions, whose abuse happened within an institution or was reported to one and ignored, or could have been caught by the system and wasn't, is absolutely staggering. Not because the policies don't exist, but because institutions consistently prioritize protecting themselves over protecting the people in their care. Reputation, liability, avoiding scandals, protecting leadership, these things get put ahead of the child or the person sitting in front of them who needed help. That is not an accident. It's a choice. And it needs to be called what it is. And I want to talk specifically about the church for a moment. Especially those who grew up in religious households. My dad was a minister, and we traveled all over the place to different churches, and we would go from one church to another, and we'd set ourselves into one church for a while, and then he'd get upset at something and we'd end up in another church. And so I grew up in a very strict and religious household. And I can say this because I've lived it. The church represents one of the most painful institutional failures. Not because faith itself is the problem. I have my own faith, and it's been part of my own healing. Okay? It's been my own. But that's just me. But because institutions that position themselves as moral authorities, as places of safety, truth, and protection, carry a particular responsibility. And when they fail to meet that responsibility, the betrayal cuts deeper. There are survivors who reported abuse to church leadership and were told to pray about it, to forgive, and keep quiet for the sake of the community. There are survivors who watched the person who abused them be quietly moved to another position rather than be removed, protected rather than be held accountable. That is not faith. That is an institution protecting itself at the expense of the people it was supposed to serve. And if that happened to you, you are absolutely allowed to be angry about it. You're allowed to grieve it. And you're allowed to hold the institution accountable, even if your own faith remains intact. Those are not contradictory things. Now, schools are legally required in most places to report suspected abuse. Teachers, counselors, administrators, they are mandated reporters, meaning if they have reasonable suspicion that a child is being abused, they are required by law to report it. And yet, countless survivors will tell you they showed every sign that teachers noticed something was wrong and that the conversations and that the counselor had conversations that should have triggered a report. Absolutely nothing happened. Sometimes people just didn't want the paperwork, and sometimes because they didn't want to be wrong, and sometimes because they didn't want to get involved in something messy. And honestly, brutal honesty here, sometimes that child may not have been of a family that was affluent enough in the community. They may have been, someone who lived in poverty and didn't have a lot. Sometimes it was that, because that happens. The child sitting across from them was less important than their own comfort. And I'm not saying that every teacher or counselor who missed the signs was negligent. Abuse is designed to be invisible. But I am saying that the system, the one with the legal obligation to act, fails survivors regularly, and that failure has consequences that last a lifetime. So, when a system that is specifically designed to protect you fails to do so, it does something particular to that person. It teaches you that authority cannot be trusted. Not just individual people, the entire structure of authority. Rules, institutions, people in position of power if that system that was supposed to protect me didn't, why in the world would I trust any system? This shows up in a lot of ways for survivors. Difficulty with authority figures, suspicious of organizations, an inability to believe that the rules and policies will actually protect them. A tendency to handle everything alone because institutions have proven they cannot be counted on. And that's not paranoia. That's a learned response to real experience. And it's one more thing that was never yours to carry. We have spent these 3 episodes talking about the people and the systems that failed you, the family who didn't see it, the bystanders who just looked away, the institutions that protected themselves instead of you. I want to close this series with something very important, okay? None of those failures, not one of them, happened because you were not worth protecting. They happened because the people and systems around you were imperfect, flawed, sometimes selfish, sometimes afraid, and sometimes more concerned with their own comfort or reputation than with a child who needed them. That's on them. Okay? Every single bit of it. You've spent years, maybe decades, carrying the weight of other people's failures, internalizing them, letting them shape what you believe about yourself and what you deserve. I'm asking you to start putting that weight down. Not all at once, not today necessarily. Piece by piece, starting with this. You are worth protecting. You still are. Take care of yourself. And I'll see you next time right here on Coffee Talk with Paul.